Okay, so the main point about tools is around the neck. We want to be using tools around the neck if possible, and use a slip lead. If the dog, you can use a flat collar, just make sure it's tight enough that it's not going to slip over their head. You can use a flat collar with just like a normal leash. If the dog's already trained on a like a prong collar, or if they wear a martingale collar, or if they wear a flat collar, you might want to use a martingale collar so it doesn't slip over. If they're on a prong, then you can totally use that. That's totally fine. But not all dogs need to be on a prong, except for Agnes. So dogs see everything in order of operations. So they see that like this happened, and then this happened, and then this happened, and then this happened. And so they put a lot of meaning into that narrative. So what that means is like if they put pressure on the leash and then they pull harder and then they get slack and they're able to sniff what they wanted to sniff, then they're going to figure out that that order of operations is that they pull on the leash, they can intervene in this, they can still sniff because they're pulling on the leash, and then they get that freedom to sniff, if that makes sense. So when you're working with your dogs on this technique, it's really important, or any technique, it's really important to think about the order of operations that the dog is seeing what's happening, the dog's vision and the dog's perspective of how things are happening in what order. So one thing to do to clarify that is to like make sure everything's really separated out. A lot of times we like to blend it all together, and then the dogs are just like, oh, that happened at one time, blah, blah, blah. So it's all just like in their mind, just like a bunch of mishmash. So what you can do to help that is to make sure that you're really clearly slowing down and separating each step of their understanding. So for example, I'm going to show you how to do what I'm talking about, but just thinking about it in terms of order of operations. So the dog is going to feel pressure on the leash, and they're used to pulling through it, and you're going to hold it tight, right? So they're not going to just pull through. You're not going to give them slack. And then the way you're going to get them to pay attention to you is either they already will pay attention to you because they're like, well, I'm stuck here. This is weird. What are you doing? Or you're going to pulse the leash. And again, I'm going to show you with a dog what I'm talking about. So you'll pulse the leash, and then they'll come towards you, and then you say yes, and then you feed them. So you can't, like if they're standing there like this, don't say yes, because you're marking that they're pulling. You have to wait until they turn towards you, then you can say yes, and then you can reward. It's also really important, they're really closely linked, but it's important that you say yes and then reward after. So don't like it's really common, like we're like, okay, I'm gonna reward you, so you like put your hand in the treat pouch, which actually, if you're not separating it out, what the dog sees is, like, say they're pulling and you put your hand in the treat pouch anticipating that you're going to reward them, and then they look at you because your hand was in the treat pouch. They're not looking at you because they felt pressure on the leash. They're looking at you for the wrong reason because you're mishmashing it all up into the same time. So be really careful when you're doing this, or anything in this course, that you are separating those things out, right? So you have to be really aware of when you put your hand in the treat pouch and when you say the words, and if you're actually responding to like what the dog is actually doing, because like I said, you don't want to reward them for pulling. You want to reward them for turning their attention to you and stopping pulling. So I'm going to draw a couple things real quick for you, and I will be right back. I made this really great drawing. It's a bird's eye view of a dog. So there's their head, and there's their little feet, and there's their little tail wagging. So the first thing we're going to do when we're working on yielding to leash pressure is we're going to use the leash in an intentional direction. Let me show you. So when you are working on yielding to leash pressure, you want the leash to be off of the dog's spine. So you want it to be to the side. Basically what's going to happen is you're holding the leash. The dog is inevitably going to go out and hit the end of the leash, and you just hold it tight. You hold onto your little handle and you just hold it tight and hold it still and stop walking. Just you get still. And a lot of times what happens is the leash will like if your dog's walking forward, the leash is going to be just on their spine. So what you're going to do is you're going to move it off the spine. It doesn't matter which direction. But basically, we want to teach them when they feel leash pressure this way, that they're going to turn their head this way and walk towards you. So they're going to feel the leash is tight. You're going to move it off the spine to one side or the other. Once they relax and turn towards you, once they take, because they're going to hold that pressure on, right? Once they take that pressure off, you say yes, and you feed them. So you want to just make sure to not do it along the spine, okay? That's really important. We're going to build on this skill a little bit later where we do use the leash along the spine, but that's so that we can get the dog to walk backwards. Right now what we're working on is getting them to turn their body to feel the pressure on the leash, right? Because it's an order of operations. So feel the pressure on the leash, turn their body towards the leash pressure, towards you, or whatever way you're moving the leash. Fucking Agnes. Goddamn. Tie downs tied to a piece of furniture is stupid. Anyway, so they are going to learn, instead of having a tight leash and pulling more and then getting to sniff, we're going to switch up the order of operations so that when they feel the tight leash, they turn into the leash pressure and then they get rewarded. So now I'm going to show you how to do that. Okay, so I have Agnes here on a flat collar and a leash, and I have my treats. She's pulling. Yes! Take a break. So I'm marking that first second where she stops pulling. I could have marked that, but I was busy. Take a break. Yes. Good. Take a break. Take a break. Yes. Good. Take a break. Yes. No. Yes. I hope you got some intel out of that. I had to fake it a little bit because Agnes and I have already worked on this before. So that's why I was throwing food on the ground, was because she needed something to go towards in order to put that leash pressure on. And something else you may have noticed that I tried to show was if it was tight, if the leash was tight and she wasn't responding, like not taking the pressure off, I started pulsing it. So I'm going to make here a little diagram for you, and then I will show it to you in a second. Okay, let's go over this beautiful diagram. So this is your order of operations like I was talking about. First, the dog puts the pressure on the leash. That's really important because a lot of times the handlers are the ones who are putting pressure on the leash. So you have to be really aware that you're not doing that, and you have to make sure you're giving them a slack leash before they hit the end of it, right? We don't want them just pulling around. Beatty, stop. It's too noisy. We don't want them just pulling around and us giving us slack as they pull us around. We want to notice that they are moving away from us and either hold the leash tight or give them slack before they feel the leash pressure. So we have dog puts pressure on the leash. Don't let the handler put the pressure on the leash. It's important. And then the handler holds tight. So you stay still. You hold tight to the leash. You want to line up the leash off the spine. So if the dog is walking straight ahead of you and they catch the leash and you hold it tight, you need to maybe move it to one side or the other. You have to get it off the spine line. Remember this beautiful diagram? You have to get it off the line of the spine. Then, if needed, say the dog is just kind of frozen there, just like waiting for you to, like maybe they don't feel or they don't register that it's happening, that the leash is tight, or they think, old ways, which is that they just need to pull harder. So what you'll do as needed is you'll pulse the leash. So you're going with the leash. And then as soon as they relax and move towards you, or at least once they relax the pressure off the leash, you're going to say the word yes, and you're going to slacken the leash. So these are both really important concepts that we're going to get into later. But don't say good, just say yes. Like just keep it exactly as this says. Say yes and feed. You want to slack the leash too. So this is another important concept we're going to get into later, but basically when one of the rewards for the dog turning to listen to you or to take the pressure off the leash, turning towards you to take the pressure off the leash, one of the rewards is there's no pressure on the leash. So making sure that you are holding the leash tight, and then once they turn towards you, that you slacken the leash and mark with yes, you're rewarding them for turning towards you. In other words, don't accidentally, if they turn towards you and you pull them in with the leash, you keep the leash tight the whole time. Don't do that. You want to say yes and slacken the leash and then reach in and reward them. Reach into your pocket to reward them. So make sure you follow this order of operations. I'll put it in the handout for you or something. And I hope all these concepts as separate concepts make sense. So now let's talk about when you would use the leash pressure down the spine. Because you might find this one thing pretty simple and you want to do more. So when the leash pressure is appropriate to go down the spine, we'll use a red leash this time, is when you're teaching the dog how to walk backwards. It's kind of a weird thing, but imagine you're walking the dog, and then they get a little ahead of you. You don't want them to always turn around to talk to you and then figure out how to get them back in the heel position. You want to just have them be able to, they get a little ahead of you, and then they can walk backwards. So we're going to teach them how to do that. So in this case, you will put the leash along the spine only, just along the spine. Don't do it a little off the spine because you're teaching them to turn, right? Like we just did. So with this, I'll show you exactly how to do it, but let me give you a diagram first. So you are first, make sure you're up against a wall, okay? Because if you're not up against a wall and you're trying to do leash down the spine, they're going to turn around and be all confused. So you are going to stand on one side of the dog. These are your little footprints. And the wall is going to be on the other. Okay? So here's a wall. Here's Here's the leash down the spine. And with the wall, it doesn't have to, it can be inside or outside, like it can be the hallway, it can be the side of the house, it can be bushes. This could just be like hedges. It could be a row of cars. It just has to be something that's like tall enough that they're not going to step over it. Ideally, when you're first teaching, it's going to be tall enough that they can't see over it either. So like a nice tall wall is nice, or like parked cars for a bigger dog is good. The main thing is you just want it to be long enough too that they can walk backwards, rather than like you don't just use like this much of a wall, because they're gonna like turn and walk all zigzaggy. So it's the really similar thing, except in this case you're gonna line them up with you, and then you're gonna put pressure on the leash. Then when they take any step backwards or movement backwards, you're going to slacken the leash, you're going to say yes, and you're going to reward them. So it's the same order of operations, it's the same principles, except you're just teaching them to walk backwards rather than turn. And like I said, the leash is down the spine rather than off to the side. So let's get a demo going here for you. Let's get a demo going. Okay, here's my map, right? And here I have Phoebe, I have a wall, and I'm going to line up the leash along her spine, and I'm staying still. Yes. And as soon as she slackened the leash, I marked with yes, I slacked my leash pressure, it was really subtle, and I rewarded her after that. Remember, you got to keep it all separated. Okay, so here's my directions again. And I'm going to straight down the spine, yes, and then reward. And see how she's kind of going away from the wall? So I want to actually stand a little closer to the wall. Come on. So I'll hold down her spine. Yes. Again. Yes. It's okay that she's in a sit. She might think that the leash pressure means she needs to sit, but did you see how she shifted her weight? And that's what I marked. So she'll probably figure it out. But I'm going parallel to her back, or not parallel to her back, but I'm going parallel to the earth, just totally straight back. Yes. See, she stood up and stepped backwards. Yes. Good. Okay, let's do the order of operations for this one. It's really similar to the last one where we're teaching them to turn with the leash pressure, but it's a little different. So first, you're gonna line up the dog along a wall. So I used a hallway wall. You can use an outdoor wall. You can use a line of cars. You can use the bushes, whatever, but you need to line them up along a wall. Then you will stand still, because we want the cue to be they feel the pressure on the leash. We don't want the cue to be that you're walking around and fidgeting and stepping, right? So you stand still, you put the pressure on the leash, and I drew another really good drawing for you. It is, you want the pressure on the leash to be straight down the spine, and this is a dog standing, and you want it to be flat along the back. If they're sitting, just still do it flat, like parallel to the earth. Here's the earth. Do it parallel to the earth, okay? Thank you. Then, as soon as the dog relaxes or steps backward, you're going to mark yes. You're going to slack your leash. Important, right? Because our whole awareness we're trying to build is around tight leash, taut leash versus slack leash. So you're going to slack your leash. It's part of their reward. And then you're going to reward them with food. So that's two different ways of doing a very similar thing, and the idea behind it, the reason, is because I want you to build a really good habit and awareness around how what's going on with the leash pressure. It's so important. It's such an important communication tool, and we muck it up all the time. So we're going to start with this, and it's going to be awesome, and let me know how it goes.